Welcome to What's My Thesis. I'm Javier Proenza, and today my guest is César López in Kansas City on the Missouri side. Uh, there's something so funny about that. It's like East and West Berlin. um, no, I'm kidding. So cool. I was asking you, or I was already starting to ask you questions, so we just hit record. So did you grow up out there? Where are you from originally?
No, actually. So again, thank you for having me.
My pleasure, man.
I ended up here by a fun series of circumstances, as we all do.
Okay.
So I ended up here in Kansas City because I attended the Art Institute.
Of San Francisco?
No, the Kansas City Art Institute.
Okay, you guys have one too. Cool.
Yeah, yeah. So I went to school here, and then as you were saying about the Missouri and Kansas side of things, right? So before that, because I emigrated to America from Guatemala,
Okay.
I was and am still an undocumented person here in the U.S. And so at that point, which is 2010, 2011,
Mm-hmm.
when before Barack did the thing where with the DACA program, there was no way, nowhere for me to go to school. So I was a recent high school graduate.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a lot of people all across the US sort of like online talking about like, what do we do? Where do we go? And somebody just out of nowhere just dropped a list of schools that you could go to,
Oh wow.
just kind of like this random angel. And one of the schools was actually on the Kansas side of Kansas City, Donnelly College, which is
Okay.
a Catholic school. I think you go there if you're going to go be a priest, which I was
Okay.
not under any.
But you're
I was
Guatemalan.
just,
Are you Catholic or did you grow up Catholic?
yes,
Lapsed
very
Catholic.
like,
Okay.
yeah, oh, hell yeah. And,
Are you are
like,
you lapsed or are you still practicing?
no, 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 I'm
Okay.
lapsed.
Okay. Cool.
And so,
Cool.
it was one of those things where the mass, the misa was in Latin. So it was
Oh yeah,
very
yeah, yeah.
hardcore,
Yeah,
very,
yeah,
you know.
yeah. Even I didn't go to Latin mass when I grew up in Italy, and that's where I did my Catholicism time. And man, yeah, no, we didn't do it in Latin. I went to the English college. It was a really nice church and stuff, and it was in Campo di Fiori. But anyway, I digress. Okay. So then you ended up going there or no?
So I ended up going. That's right. That's exactly where I went. And at that time, I didn't know about the Art Institute. And through a whole nother series of circumstances, someone was like, "You know about this other school over there?" And I was like, "Yeah, hell yeah, let me find out." And so then I transferred over to the Art Institute over here on the Missouri side.
Okay, cool.
And so then that's where I went to school, and that's what I'm doing now.
How long were you in Guatemala?
I was there until about I was 11, so from 1991 to 2000, 2001.
2001.
Yeah,
Okay, it's 1990. So all right. I'm like there was so much information what you just told me. Like it gave me your age, the
yeah.
age she moved. um, cool. Well, I mean, not to be a dummy, but I recently looked up why all the Central American countries have blue and white as their flag colors. Because
Oh
it's
yeah.
like, honestly, I get them mixed up a lot. Like there's some that have the blue and the white vertical,
Uh-huh.
and then there's
Oh,
some
like
that have
this.
it's like this, and then there's different emblems and stuff. And I
Uh-huh.
realized that all of them, it's because, except for one. I forget which one. One is because it has the Atlantic and the Pacific on
Hmm.
either side, and then Guatemala doesn't touch both sides, no?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does.
Oh, is that the one?
That's the
Okay,
reason why.
that's the reason why. And then all the other ones are because the sky is blue and the Pacific, or no, yeah, and the Pacific Ocean is blue. So it's like so. That tells you like when they're horizontal versus vertical. It's really interesting. Like when you start like why I was just like so curious, but it totally makes sense. And then I
Well, they
started to
know.
look. Go ahead.
I was going to say also that they have such a shared history. They also all declared their independence at the same time for the same reasons.
Oh, really?
It was like
So,
the whole team just quit colonialism. They're like, you know what? Nah, we're out.
what? Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's gone real well for all of them. Man, America, oof, what a complicated relationship we have to it. So, okay, well then, I mean, I can ask you a little bit about Guatemala. We're in Guatemala City. Or is that where you were from, or?
Quetzaltenango, which is a smaller place, kind of on the other side of the mountain range,
Uh,
because it touches both of the oceans, the mountain range that moves through it, and so I'm kind of on the west side of things.
okay. Cool. And like, did you come here with family, or you just kind of did it on your own? By the way, I'm assuming that you are like protected status because you're openly speaking on a podcast about being undocumented, right?
Yeah,
Like, yeah, like
yeah,
otherwise I would be like, oh my God, we got to cut this out. But you're not my first, what is it? You guys are dreamers? What's the
DACA.
terminology?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
DACA.
DACA. Yeah.
Okay. So like, but you left your family behind, or are they also in the U.S.?
Yeah, so I immigrated to the U.S. with my mom and my brother,
With your mom and your brother? Cool. Are
and
they
so many
also in?
people.
Go ahead.
Oh
Sorry.
yeah, they're here as well. And I was going to say, much like them and all of us, you see just waves of people going, and you're like, okay, well, I've got like two other cousins that are coming, so I'll ride with them,
Yeah, yeah,
so to speak.
yeah, yeah. Was it hard to cross? I mean, or did you just do it like straight up? Like, did you go through the dangerous route, or did you just kind of come over? Can I
No,
ask you?
it was yeah.
Is this okay to ask? I'm sorry.
I think it's okay
Okay,
because
cool.
I have fostered a lot of open conversation, which we'll get into once we get into the art and stuff. But I've
Yeah, yeah,
fostered a very open conversation about what's happening because it's not just me. At some point, it isn't even about me.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
The issues that are affecting all of us, both now that we're here or even back home, like some of those
yeah,
things,
yeah, yeah.
are so much bigger than one person.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure.
And
I
so,
mean,
how did I get?
growing up, our what we called each other's was balseros and refugee. Like that was like our dig towards each other. So, like we all Latinos all have this weird relationship to coming here. So I don't ask it in a you should go back kind of way, but just sort of curiosity, and also kind of it's interesting how dangerous it can be. Like.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a really complex set of things that are all happening at once. It's not just like an individual going to one place. I just think you're also dealing with political things that are happening at different times. There was a moment where even weather. So we left home near the end of the year because the school year is different than the school year in America,
Uh huh.
and so we pretty much were headed up north near the end of December and January. And so, due to holidays, there was not as many things happening because everyone was enjoying the holiday. And so, it's kind of funny to see people like you go somewhere to celebrate Christmas with them, but
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
like kind of just passing through. Same thing with New Year's. And then at some point, um, there was a time where, because we were headed northwards towards Chicago, there was a moment where we're like, hey, it's actually winter up there. So we have to wait it out. And so
Yeah.
there was a whole moment in the end of January and February where we pretty much had to just wait around in Mexico because it
Hmm.
was winter up here. And my mom's like, well, and the group of people that are all coming, like, we should just wait it out. Like, let's just
Yeah.
enjoy this tropical weather while we can because this is probably the last of it.
Yeah, and it's where you're from too. Like, yeah, I can't. I still think about like, I don't think I'm ever gonna live in a place that it rains, that it snows every season. I mean, also rain. Like, I can't handle like places. Just my heart melts. I was recently back in Miami, and there was like a tropical depression, and I was like, oh, that's why they called it that. Because I was just like, my mood just dropped because I couldn't leave the house. It was so gray outside. I'm living in California. That shit never happens out here. So yeah, no, weather. I'm definitely a Florida boy. The farthest, like, I think the farthest north I've ever lived is Florence, which I don't know, or Maryland. I don't know which one's farther up, but yeah, well, cool. So then, I usually weave into this part of the like origin story, like how you got into art. Like, were you already making art before you came over, or when did you get into art? When did you start realizing that you were burdened by this thing that is like that? No, that you're never gonna escape. You're always gonna have to make stuff.
It's a really, I've been thinking about that quite some time now because let me just be honest with all of us right now. It wasn't always the thing that I was interested in.
Yeah, yeah.
So at that point, right, like what I was saying earlier, around 2010, 2011, I didn't have papers. And so it was like, I just need to go to college. I just need
Yeah, yeah.
something. I need anything. Like, I will fucking go. I will be a whatever. And so through those circumstances, how I ended up at the Art Institute. Now,
Okay.
in thinking back at what I was interested in, a lot of math, a lot of science. I've loved reading about like inventors and stuff. And I actually been writing about this for a different project, but I think I like the idea of inventors in history because they, in retrospect, for in my environment as someone who was a recent immigrant to America, like the situation is kind of fucked. Like there was no it was difficult in more than one way, and so you realize like, what do I got to do to change my situation?
Yeah.
And in your child imagination, you're like, well, what if I like invent something, and that is like the access to a technology that's going to give me more. It's not
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
wealth, but to change my situation. And
Yeah. Yeah.
ultimately, that's the question that was always with me, because that's the question we were all asking ourselves when thinking about, okay, we're graduating high school. What do we do? The murmurs online say like people were going to Canada, to Cuba. They were going to emigrate again to go to school. And I was like, damn, I gotta
Yeah.
do that shit. And
Yeah.
so how did I come to this? A lot of just like, I just need to survive. I just need to get around. I will latch onto anything. I could have ended up at another school doing something completely different, and I'd be doing the same thing. And so
Wow.
some of that really has now come around to my interest in sculpture and thinking about how to build something, how to intersect with technology, industrial design, my personal life. And I think all those things are the studio is now an amalgamation of all those things. And
So
so
wait, sorry. Go ahead. I have a
I
question, but
was
go ahead. No,
so
no, no. You
just
finish your thought.
so just to say, like, it's I'm making it up as I go, but it just so happens that that's what's happening in the arts, anyways.
Yeah, yeah. So so it sounds like your school was one of the only places that you could go, and the other option was Latin priests. Is that am I? So
Pretty much.
you ended up in art for pragmatic reasons, which is crazy because like I love it. That's such an interesting thing, but I mean you definitely have the aptitude for it. I've seen your work, it's not like it, but that's such an interesting thing. So then but the inventor part makes sense to me because you're like what is like it's more like if you invent the iPhone, it's you and 20 other million people in a company, right? Like, but when you're an artist, you are kind of an inventor, right? Like you're
Yeah.
inventing these visual ideas. So I see that through line. That's really interesting.
And what? Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to add that what's happening is you're there were all these things that I was really obsessed with. Like I'm still obsessed with my iPod Nano, which I have here somewhere. There was a point where
Yeah.
that became such an interesting object, such an important object in my life, and it was both because it was shiny, it was an object, and it was like industrially designed a certain way. But again, as I've been reflecting and writing about this for this other project, is thinking how because when you leave home, when you emigrate, you actually have to leave all of your worldly belongings behind.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
have no belongings, and so then I developed a sort of how do you say like a very obsession with meticulously designed and produced objects. Like I learned to love nice shit, but
Yeah,
not in
yeah.
a not in a vain way. But it was like, oh, so much work goes into this single thing,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
well, as our example, right? Like Apple products kind of do some of that. They're
Yeah.
not the only ones, but I just became obsessed with objects and industrial design because I had left everything behind.
Yeah. What's interesting, especially because like what 2010, that's already deep into like iPhone, right? iPhone's been
Hmm.
out since like 2000. But I remember before the iPhone, I remember like I remember sitting in my friend's living room with an iPod at like just the first gens iPods, right? Like before they got big and beefy, when they still had the reflective like metallic thing in the back. And I remember explaining to my friend like this holds 1,000 songs, and like and watching the realization of what that thing was come over him, because he was like fuck Apple, especially at the time. Like it was in the early iMac, like iMac was the biggest product, the big colorful one, so it was like kind of like the Windows people really hated it. But no, it's interesting to think about those things, especially like something like that that's so portable. You had it, but was that one of the things that you were able to keep when you came, or you didn't even have that?
No, I didn't have that. I got one here.
Okay. No, that's interesting. So then like what I mean, do you still feel like connections to Guatemala? What, like, I haven't really been. I'm mostly aware of like when these countries come back on my radar when there's a coup going on, right? And there's like there's always a coup because it's always a right wing coup, and you know who's promoting it, right? So I'm always like, oh, okay. When was, I guess the question is, when was the last time Guatemala got couped? Because you guys had a pretty serious war for a very long time, but I think that might be before your time, right? Like that. When did? Go ahead.
The Civil War ended in '97, but like the
So
conflict.
you were born in 91, right? You said?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the conflict doesn't really end. I mean, it dissipates like on paper, right? And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
really, it took the country quite a bit to begin to stabilize. I would even argue that they're still working out some of that stuff. Even last summer, is it last summer? Let me. So we have a new president now. Shout out the new president, who is being supported by the current administration here in the United States.
Who
And
is
I
being supported?
that
Okay,
is,
go
I
ahead.
think, in fact, a portion of why it is stabilizing. Although
Yeah,
when it
yeah.
was becoming the presidency that it is now, there was a lot of uproar about like, is this for real? But then the people that were accusing the other branches of the government that were accusing, saying that the presidency was not valid, were actually according to some resources the people who are the corrupt branch of the government. So they're
Okay.
still actively working that out right now.
Yeah. Yeah, but when you say that the US supports the president, I get mad suspicious of the president.
I would too. I would too. And
No, no, I know you know. I know you know. I'm just saying, I'm sharing this for the audience.
and so,
uh,
so all
go
these
ahead.
Central American countries have a really complex relationship, both with each other, but also with the United States. I mean, going back
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Guatemalan's history, which we don't have to do this today, but
I'm
look it up.
I'm happy. I'm happy to do this, but this is your episode, so we can talk about what you want to talk about. I'm curious. I always like, like Americans are so blind to this, So anytime I can talk about this, and I don't know all the details of Guatemala. I just know we all share the same essential like struggle of like you learn your history and it bums you out, because your history is also American history.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I really like how you're saying that because learning about it is how I became more and more connected to it.
Yeah.
And I was
So
learning.
anyway, so go ahead. Go ahead. I'm happy to talk about
Really,
this.
again, I just think that it's the history matters because it's how I ended up here, and it's part of this sort of like creation myth of why I'm here and why I have the problem that I have, or the interesting situation that I'm in. It's
Hmm.
all tied together, both like as far as back as the 50s and the 60s, the American government was tied in helping propagate the financial interest of American companies, not just in Guatemala, in so many other countries, and so that has an effect that builds over time and over time, and we're still dealing with some of those things, and so that
Yeah.
affects the people such as myself and my family and a lot of the populations in Guatemala, which is why they need to emigrate to get jobs, make money, and then you end up with someone like me or potentially even the next generation of people who are the children of recent immigrants and DACA recipients. So it's all kind of tied together, and
Yeah.
it's a really complex set of relationships that I've had to learn about piece by piece as I've
Yeah.
been
Yeah.
getting myself here.
Yeah. And we're entering a pretty interesting place right now because it really is like, you know, the way that the immigration story is told is so not sympathetic to the struggle of people that are leaving their countries behind. Ideally they wouldn't want to, but we keep meddling with them, and like I mean, if you like, I know this is El Salvador, but what's happening in El Salvador is crazy. With MS-13 gangs that came over here, they learned gang life from over here, over there. In El Salvador, the gangs were mostly like just social clubs, like teenage stoners, and then they came over here, and a lot of people started to really need to band together to sort of protect themselves, and then they got deported, and then the problem got sent over there, and now there's this crazy government over there that is doing wild stuff, man. Wild stuff, and putting it on social media. It's crazy. So all these things like was so interconnected, the flow of like things, and it's hard to imagine that with those deportations they wouldn't know, like the American government wouldn't know that that would happen. So it just feels like it's constant warfare. Like my sister recently went back to Cuba, and she said there's no one there like between 18 and 40. Everybody just goes, like, and that so that's the reality of where I'm from, and it's the reality of where you're from. If I still lived in, like, my parents came, my mom was I think she was a Peter Pan, and anyway, like, she came over by herself, or no, I talked to her. She was in the era of Peter Pan, but she wasn't part of the program. But yeah, it's a very, very, very complicated history. We've been going for like almost 30 minutes now, so I want to give you some time to talk about your work. But I really appreciate this conversation. This is to me what being Latino is about. These conversations, we speak the same language. We have Spanish colonialism in common, and for better or worse, Catholicism is a big part. We know a lot of people. Now, I'm not saying that your family or my family directly, but we know a lot of people that are anti-abortion, and then they get tokenized, and for like by liberals who are like, oh no, let's vote for them, and like, you don't agree with them. So it's really, you see a side of the world, and then we all see it, and then we all talk to each other, and we're like, wait, how fucked up is it where you're from?
Yeah. And I think that this shared set of issues is, I think, why it's such a dynamic group of people that I'm obviously excited to be a part of always. Almost like that's like my spiel, honestly.
It's my core identity, like it's I identify as Latino more than I would American, like I don't agree with a lot of the shit that the American government does, but like Latino is like a stateless identity. It's a stateless community. I really appreciate it, and it's a statelessness that occurs here in America specifically, because you guys weren't calling yourselves Latinos in El Salvador, no? Were you? Is that terminology that happens out there?
There's so much, because Guatemala has multiple native populations who call themselves so many different things, and I mean,
exactly.
Some of that stuff is just old before, like, what is it, 1529 or whenever the ships landed, right? Like, some of that shit is beyond old.
Yeah.
And so it's a really interesting topic to be a member, I suppose, of the diaspora, and then have considerations for the motherland still. I think there are people, which is fine too, who are like, they're interested in their life here, and I get that. Like, I absolutely get that. I just think that some of the things that I'm interested in is continuing to participate and learn and educate myself in dialogue with the home country.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I think that you being an immigrant yourself, and me being first generation, like, you're a lot more rooted to that. I think by the second generation, you start to lose the language. And, because your parents maybe don't speak it as well. Like, I mean, I don't speak Spanish as well as my mom. I speak it with her, and I can hold a conversation. But so it makes sense that like, you end up assimilating. But yeah, I mean, it is very important to people like us, So, all right. So then tell me about your, like, I like this idea of product centric approach to art making. I do get that, because like, I used to do conceptual stuff. I still identify as a conceptual artist. I'm just painting more because I've always drawn, and I kind of wanted to focus on that a little bit more. It's a little bit more immediate than kind of scheming and putting together a sculpture that involves like electronic products, and if I'm not going to show, like, if I'm not going to show one of my conceptual pieces, if I don't have a deadline for it, it doesn't make sense to make it and just have it in the house, but if you have a studio space, that makes a little bit more sense. So tell me about your practice, because it seems like, wait, so you started school at the Institute when? How old were you?
It was 2014, 15.
Oh, wow. So you I guess straight out of high school, you essentially almost, with a little bit of a lag, right?
There was a little bit of a lag where we were trying to figure out where to get into.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
So really, and I graduated in 2019, right before the COVID.
Uh-huh.
And so,
Yeah.
and then like you get out and there's like, pause on everything.
No, I know. Fuck. Yeah, you got double fucked.
Yeah.
During that period, I was joking with my mom. I was like, man, all these Cubans that ran away from communism, and started their business, and now they come to capitalism, and capitalism fucks them twice. Like, it's like their businesses are shut down. I mean, good for them that they were in Florida, because Florida was a little bit more sympathetic to like that subset of people. But yeah, no, that shit was crazy. But sorry, go ahead. So tell me more about the work and the practice.
Yeah, so it's really related to a lot of these things we were just talking about, because I myself am trying to make sense to some of these things. I don't feel like I need to answer the question, but I just love just throwing the ball around with the same question. So I'm thinking about building, sculptures and system-based things to do a little bit of thinking through production, labor, all these ideas around how products get made. I mean, let's just continue with our example of Apple products. The iPhone is this incredible object that shows you no labor.
Yeah.
It's almost like as if it was hatched by some sort of miraculous unicorn or something. You can't see that it was touched by the hand, and it's in
Yeah.
everyone's pocket. But so much labor goes into that. I mean, some of that labor is questionable.
Well, it's funny, like, because what you're essentially saying is that there's no, like, it's not handmade. You can't see the traces of the hands, but then the kind of corrupt mining for cobalt that happens is called artisanal, which that's basically like artisanal mining basically means that someone's doing it by hand. So yeah, so the labor is like straight up hidden, but it also has this, like, even though it's exploitative, it has this like hipster branding to it. It's artisanal. It's not like slave labor.
Right, that's exactly right. And so what I like about I shouldn't say what I like about that. What I've been investigating and looking into is that the practice of myself, I am thinking about how do I hide myself, and I say hide like this with air quotes. How do I hide the labor to also discuss a lot of what we were just talking about being an immigrant in America who doesn't have papers? How do I talk about some of the hidden tactics and techniques that I would say my people first, immigrants utilize, which I probably shouldn't speak on today, but if you know.
No, that's fine. I know I don't want to fuck anybody's bag up or anyone's system. I don't. When I have a squatter on, I don't ask them where all the squats are.
But what I'm trying to say is that so people come to the United States and have to figure things out, and a lot of those things are invisible, and that invisibility is actually the thing that protects you. And I find that to be a very interesting and potent area to operate in when describing and understanding a lot of the work. And I was already interested in industrial design, and maybe there was something inside of me that attracted me to it, which we touched on a second ago. But when you think about, like, how do I make something, because the works of art the discipline requires us to be like, this is me and this is who I am, and I've touched it and I've made it. But I'm like, oh wait, I feel like I don't do that, and I say that again, right? So how do I discuss this topic? And so I've found that by utilizing certain materials, like what you see behind me, industrial materials that come with a high finish, sort of a finish fetish sort of thing, having a constructed visual language, is how I've been able to touch on some of those things.
Well, go ahead. Sorry.
And I just wanted to add that I also feel like it is a way of discussing the things that are happening in my life in a non-direct way, so that there is room for other interpretations as well.
Well, to me, that's really interesting, because the first thing I think of when you're talking about all this industrial design is like corporate, right? So, this like, not that you're making objects that are soulless, but that speak in that same vocabulary, right? Of like, not maybe sterile is too hard of a word, but kind of in that, like, which is interesting. It makes me want to ask you about culture shock as we continue to talk about your art practice. But like, because like, I've never been to Guatemala, but I imagine that America, I imagine there's a lot of Spanish colonialism, a lot of like, I think of Antigua and like titles like that, names of cities like that, like the idea of it being sort of, I guess the technical term would be vernacular architecture, right? Which is like specific, like now if you made a Spanish colonial house, it would be considered vernacular because you are using that vernacular of that to do that. I learned that from an architect, so I'm pretty sure I got that right. It's an episode, so you can go back and check and check me. But over here, that is a very American thing from my understanding. I grew up in Italy. There's such a romance to like ornateness, and everything is on the golden ratio, right? Whereas over here, it's the Apple Store again. Like we keep I mean it when this dude died, Jobs died, I was applying for schools and I wrote a paper, like in my introductory paper or in my applications, essays, I wrote about how like it was really like we were mourning a monarch, when he passed away, because this guy changed all of our lives with these gadgets, and changed the whole world. And then you would go to these stores, which would be like cathedrals, and they had altars essentially to him with his photograph. We all mourned. It was a crazy experience that kind of harkens back to other systems, like more feudal systems or more stuff like that, and I'm not the first person to observe feudalism. Like, I mean, we're getting there, right? Like the neo-feudalism seems to be par for the course with all these peasants, I hate to use the word, but unhoused people, right, being treated like they are peasants, like they're not human, they're subhuman. That got dark, but but to me that's really fascinating. Like those are things that, as somebody who grew up outside of the U.S., when I come here, I see that, and to me, so talk a little bit about your culture shock, please, and then aggrandize your culture a little bit in that.
Well, what I like about that is thinking through that. Some of those things happened at a really young age, at a really impressionable age. And I think that I don't know if I have a direct answer. It is a question that I contend with in studio. That's why I sort of keep making things. And I don't know just yet if I have a concise answer, because I'm still going through it. I think that both myself and not only when I got here, but in my whole life growing up, there were other cousins constantly coming and other groups of people. And one of the things that we would do, which is kind of hilarious to add to this, is that we would take people to Burger King. That was like, welcome to America. Let's go get you a burger. And it was just like this strange thing. And I don't know how it started, but it became the thing that we did. It absolutely became the thing. And this idea of like, welcome to America, right this way, sir, to the cargo cultism. Right this way. And there was multiple times where we take somebody to Walmart, especially like really older people that have come to the US, and they were just like shocked by so much. You could just get everything here, as an example. And I've seen, it's not just myself, but I've seen other accounts of, someone's parents coming to the US, and you go to the Costco for the first time and people are like crying. And so there's a really interesting, it's a very subtle and mysterious thing to understand, like how it impacts people, because there isn't a lot of people to reflect on it. I mean, I've been thinking about it, and it's part of the studio now that I get to do this. But I think most individuals that I saw, multiple individuals, multiple accounts, come to the U.S. and end up sort of like just on survival mode. You're just working and you're doing the thing. You send money back home, whatever, and then you sort of and then. I saw also enough accounts of people who said, "Yeah, no, this sucks. Fuck this. I'm leaving." Like they made enough to build a home, to build a business, to buy property, and they're like, "Okay, I'm out." I almost feel like they sort of just kept their head down, just sort of on the grindstone for years, almost like decades. People that I knew, cousins and uncles and other family members and other friends, who it was too much. It was too much. I don't know if they ever got to process it while they were here, to have thoughts about it and opinions. But I think we all knew, we're like, yeah, no, this is just not it.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I can imagine coming over here. It depends on where you get to live, right? Like, I'm sure, like, I've lived in parts of LA. I'm not going to trash the neighborhood that I'm in. I like it, but my experience is completely different, And, there's like, the unhoused situation here just keeps kind of getting crazier and crazier. And I think that there's really no place in LA where that's not the case. So, but yeah, I imagine coming over here and seeing that is probably not ideal, And like, is there stuff that you miss from Guatemala that you would like to that we don't provide for you here in America? I love how I represent America.
Yeah.
What am I not providing you? Why do you want to go home? No.
I think again, it's also I agree with you. It's where you live. So I live in Kansas City, and predominantly in the Midwest. There is raza here. There is groups of people, and there are enclaves and subcultures, but they are not integrated into the predominant city centers. Let's just say they're just not integrated into. It's almost not big enough for there to be a whole section that's like that. There are very small pockets, and I think that's why I purposely choose to live where I live now, which is to live in a neighborhood that's diverse. I lived in a place called Plaza, which is like the mall pretty much. And it was cute. It's super cute. I loved it. But I just I was not getting enough culture. And I found myself traveling across the city to be like, okay, I got to get some tacos. I got to get, some arroz con leche. It's just like, and I would go there to have my cup filled, so to speak. And I had this need and desire, obviously, because I lived almost an entire life in Guatemala, and it's still inside me. And so that's the thing that I'm trying to reach, whether it's me educating myself on the country's history or understanding the social political condition of the country, or even seeking out food. So for myself, I think it really is about finding those centers and being able to partake in them.
Are you guys arroz y frijoles, moro? What is your Guatemalan main staple for? Because at mine, I don't get to eat black beans and rice out here. That shit doesn't exist. I go to Miami, I'm like, oh,
Yeah. But, a lot of arroz, a lot of frijoles, a lot of tortillas, corn tortillas. Quite a bit. Yeah, corn tortillas only, at least for us, anyways.
Yeah.
And then you have to seek out the specialty products, and if the population density isn't big enough, you don't get as much variety in it. So I actually just came back from a trip from Chicago, last night, and they had a pollo campero, which, do you know what a pollo campero is?
No, I've never had that. What is it?
A pollo campero is just a fried chicken spot, but it's a Guatemalan fried chicken spot. So every time I've gone to either Chicago or Oklahoma City for the Guatemalan consulate, there's for sure a pollo campero, and it's always fucking full.
I don't think Cubans have fried chicken as like a specialty dish. That's interesting, but
I mean, call it a specialty dish. I just think it's like a thing, though.
Yeah. No, but I mean, we have more anyway. Whatever. Maybe this is boring. This is only interesting to Latinos. Do you guys do maduros?
No, what's a maduro?
Plátanos maduros? Plátanos maduros? No.
Well, what we do with the plátanos is they are it's mashed into a paste, and then you almost
tostones?
But then you turn it into a ball, and then you fill it with black beans, and then you fry that.
Oh shit! That sounds awesome.
Oh,
rellenito, okay.
Rellenito, and then you fry it, and then you cover it with powdered sugar.
Yeah,
and that's breakfast. That's how you're.
That's awesome. Damn. Beans for breakfast. That's very British. Well, I mean, so then you're here and you're doing these communities. What can you tell me about these communities? And what can you tell me about that invisibility part? Because that is interesting to me without, blowing up people's spots. But because it's I mean, not in a negative, I'm not putting that on you, but it must be weird to be a non-citizen in a country, right? A lot of people, I talk about it on the show quite a bit, like passport privilege, which is the idea that like if you have an American passport, you have a privilege that you do not recognize. You know, so like people are always like, check your white privilege. I'm like, check your American privilege. Like, you know, you can be brown with a passport and you got fucking clout that you wouldn't have otherwise. So to me, it's interesting, and like, and how would you have to move? That's definitely a privilege that I have that I've exploited. I've even lived in other countries, you know. So talk to me a little bit about that.
You know, it's a situation where I don't know the first person to figure out. This is the genius, really. And so it's a word of mouth sort of thing. They're like, okay, you do it like this, and this is what you need. And they're like, or someone will go find out. One of the reasons why I was exposed to that so early on is because as the child and the immigrant, I was the one translating. So I was
Yeah.
looking at like crazy documents. They're like, oh, what, you gotta do this shit.
Wow.
So I was exposed to some of that information way earlier than I think most other young adult immigrants are. Typically, I think that happens when you graduate high school or you gotta get a job. Even to
Yeah.
get your driver's license, upon certain states, every state is different. So you're probably encountering it as a young adult. Whereas I
Mhm.
was translating shit when I was like 11, and like, oh, I probably shouldn't be, I probably shouldn't be exposed to some of this information. But so
Yeah, yeah.
you become aware of the systems that are in place, and then you learn to navigate
So you're like a bureaucrat scholar.
them. I suppose so. And as you become more educated and all that stuff, you're like, okay, so you're gonna need this paperwork, this paperwork, this paperwork. And yeah, I've never
Man.
thought of it like that, but I think you're right.
Well, I think for my mom that was probably her life, you know, because my mom came here, but I never had, dude. My parents are the bureaucrat scholars in the family. My dad worked for the UN, so so they're very much, and man, they are so. I don't know about you, but my parents are so intense about following every single rule. Like they don't fudge shit. They don't like. They're like, nah, you don't fuck around with that. Like that is not where you start playing. Is that the case with you guys? Like,
Yeah,
are you
I
like,
have it here, but
huh?
I would show. I don't have it here, but I would show you my document sort of portfolio. It's nicer than the archive for the works part.
Yeah, you don't lie
Every
on forms. You don't bring the wrath of the government. You don't want to be noticed, even as citizens. You know, because the thing about Cubans is that like after 15 years, they were granted a side. Like we had the most open borders of anybody because they really wanted to undermine like. I mean, imagine if Cuba stays communist, that with all the leftist impulses in Nicaragua and all of that, like you know, I mean, the war in El Salvador, the war in Guatemala, it was all pretty much about that stuff. So they just wanted to drain Cuba of its citizenry and starve it, right? So that's why they just were like, Miami is no longer for white people. Thank you, America. You know, like that, or America said, like, hey, white people, get out of there because you're not gonna like this, right? Like, but it's interesting. Like, I want to ask you a little bit about the scene in Kansas City, but I want to ask you, you know, for the purposes of you being cool with the government, what do you love about America, right? You like the CIA, you like the FBI. No, I'm
I
kidding.
love
No,
the FBI and the CIA. Actually, my CIA agent is listening in right now.
no. But seriously, like, what do you like about America? Because I mean, you're staying here, and then we can maybe talk a little bit about Kansas City art scene,
Yeah.
which I completely forgot to ask you about at the beginning of the show. But that's fine. We can do it at the end.
You know, I think I don't want to fall into this trope, but it is a trope for a reason. With the right attitude and the right resources, you really can do something that you can't do in another country here. And
I would definitely agree with that.
I know it's a huge trope, and I know it's very complex. I know that, but with the right fucking attitude, you can really do it for yourself. I
Yeah.
know there are challenges, 100%. I trust me, I know, but you can do it. We couldn't openly laugh at the government in Guatemala in the 80s and 90s. We could not have
No.
done this over there. So again,
Now I'm worried about you going back now.
now,
You were on this podcast. What is my thesis?
yeah, they're gonna like read it back to me. No, I really think at its core, that's really what I think, and I really believe it. I again, with the acknowledgement that it is a very complex thing. Not everyone can do what I get to do, even the privileged position that I have. Whether even it's just as an artist or as an immigrant. I just think with the right attitude or the right set of circumstances, you really can do it. You really can turn it around. I mean, that's why so many other immigrants, not even just from Central America, from all across the world, end up here. I think
Yeah.
there is something to that, with a little asterisk, of course. But that's what I like about it. I just
Well, I
haven't
think.
to it.
I think that asterisk is. It's really, this country is really good for people that want to be in business. If you want to start your own business, maybe if you're brown and you try to work within the system and have a jobby job kind of situation, you might be limited by education, access to education and stuff like that. But you can come here and just start a business. And if you're making money, that's all that matters, you know, which is one of the things that I think a lot of white liberals in particular don't understand about conservative Latinos, you know, and a lot of them vote Republican because they are business people and they have no interest in sort of engaging in institutions that really don't accept them at all, you know. So that is a really interesting point, that as I do the show more, you know, being from a place that does have a lot of right-wing conservative people, like, they're still humans and they're reacting to their realities, right? So I feel like it is kind of racist to sort of dismiss that, like, you know, I got ripped on TikTok by this one woman who was like just shitting on my guest who was Argentinian and wasn't even Cuban, and was like, and I was like, Jesus, you know, and was basically just being all out racist, but because she voted Democrat, she was right, you know. So it's really like that dichotomy, you know. I'm outside of the duopoly. I don't vote either way, but it, to me, that's an interesting dialogue that what's it called, that doesn't happen in California because everybody's so idealistic and they have all these like things, words like anti-racism, which like doesn't hide the fact that they're racist. But anyway, sorry, I went off track. But no, I do think that in terms of like opportunity for people that really have like a go-getter mentality, there is a lot of immigrant communities that benefit from just being able to work really, really fucking hard and make something and make money, you know? So
Yeah.
anyway, all right, tell me about Kansas City.
Well, so right now, as you all may or may not know, Kansas City is split across the state line, which is what we were saying in the beginning.
Yeah.
So Missouri,
East and West Berlin.
pretty exactly the same. Exactly the same. And so the Missouri side is much bigger, and a lot of the art-related things are in the Missouri side, although, you know, there is still plenty of activity on the Kansas side of things. My studio currently is in the Missouri side, although I live on the Kansas side.
Yeah.
And so it's very common for people to sort of like kind of do that. Well, we've got a pretty good range of artist-run spaces that, you know, come and go. And I think that COVID definitely shrinked a lot of that down, but there's a lot of revamping happening now. And I think it's a really exciting time to be here. It's still not that big. I believe so. Even my weekend trip to Chicago, I was like, oh, damn.
No, Chicago.
There's just so much more. And Chicago
Yeah.
also has a really amazing artist-run scene. But we've got a handful of galleries, a lot of energy in the city. I think it's a really great place to be. I think that we could use more of the same. We just need more. We're not doing anything than anybody else. We simply just need more.
Yeah.
And I would encourage all of us to continue to do what we're doing. We just got to keep going.
Are you you told me that you collaborate with a space. You introduced me to someone, I forget their name. So like, are you mostly showing at those artist-run spaces because I imagine that the more commercial galleries are a little bit less accessible since there are fewer of them, right? Or does
Yeah.
that not play out to be true?
I think it's more of a generational thing. I see it. I just think some individuals have been here decades, and they're part of that. They're part of that circle. So for
Interesting.
myself, I mostly show in spaces like that. I just closed the show at the Nelson Atkins Museum here with a large group show of Latino artists. There was about 22 of us, and I think that's great. That's a really wonderful moment in all of our histories to be recognized by an institution, even in our own city.
Yeah.
And so there is some of that happening, and I think there is a really that has put a lot of energy back into the system. That I think it's really wonderful. Our institutions, we've got, I would say, less than 10, and so
Really?
I think it's due to the size,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
they're all kind of in their own worlds. I think the Nelson Atkins Museum recognizing some of the local artists is really wonderful. So
Why haven't Missouri and Kansas gone to war over Kansas City? Like,
you
when is
know,
that gonna?
there are proxy wars with the Chiefs and the Royals.
Oh, okay, okay, fair enough, fair enough. Wow, I didn't even realize that. Oh man.
And I myself don't know that much about it. I don't really understand American football, but I know it's a thing. They're like trying to court each other to be the hometown.
My God, I'm so bad at this that I thought you were talking about baseball.
Oh, no, I think the Royals are baseball. Yeah, they're
Royals are
baseball.
baseball. Oh, okay. Oh,
Yeah.
but they're fighting. Oh, because okay, yeah, yeah. So they're fighting to claim ownership of Kansas City
Yeah.
teams.
In,
I
in
get it.
addition, there's also the World Cup coming, and so there's a lot of things in the city
Wait,
that are
there's the
happening
World Cup is coming to
to
when?
Kansas City. So it's going to be hosted by I think they call it the North, like Mexico, uh, the U.S. and Canada, and so different cities are hosting different parts of the World Cup.
Oh shit! What year is that coming up?
20,
20,
26,
26? Oh,
25,
okay.
26. Double check
Wow.
me.
No, I mean I used to coach soccer and used to be really into it, but I got so burnt out and jaded by how corrupt the system is over here. It's the fucking Wild West. There's no regulation. It's just crooks from other countries with accents fighting each other over money. And mostly British people are at the top of the anybody with like a because of the EPL, they just assume that they're smarter. When I was a kid, it was impressive to be from Italy, but anyway, so then like, do you have like a good community? Are you I see you have a studio. Are there other studios? It was kind of noisy. It sounded like there might be other people in studios nearby. Is that the right assessment?
Yeah, so I'm in a studio building called Wholesome here in the West Bottoms, which is the last portion of the industrial places here in Kansas City. And
Okay.
Wholesome it's 5 floors of artist studios. There's a lot of energy
Oh,
here. It's one of the unique places where you can get a cheap large studio and really just get to work.
can I hurt all of my LA friends' feelings and ask you how much a studio there costs?
450.
That's not too bad. That is close to. You could probably find something for 500 out here, depending on the square footage. I think
Yeah,
out here it's like $1 a square foot in one of these places, so that doesn't seem too bad. It seems like studio spaces everywhere are just fucking
yeah.
expensive. Yeah. Well, cool, man. I mean, anything else that I haven't asked you that you might want to add? Like, any thoughts specifically about art or about growing up, about, America, about Guatemala, anything. I'm just throwing stuff out there so you got
No,
something.
I think we've covered it really well because the life situation is tied to how the works and the idea that goes in, the philosophy that goes into making the works. I think that
Yeah.
having a really balanced history and conversation about even just my history today is really what goes into a lot of this stuff. And I think
Yeah.
that I don't have any answers. I'm just sort of like contending with a lot of these things and showing up
Yeah.
every day and seeing what's happening.
Do you like, was it hard for you once you started studying art? Like, did you have any challenges just kind of being like, oh, I'm an artist? Or were you like doing that cop out shit where people do is like, I'm not an artist, but I make art? Like, was defining as an artist easy to contend with for you? Because sometimes it's not. It
Not in
wasn't
the
for me.
not in the beginning. It wasn't not
Yeah.
in the beginning. I think that I still feel a little bit of that where I don't feel like I'm a very good poet. I know some other individuals that have a very refined sense of poetry about how they do things. I think
Uh-huh.
I'm just a little maybe more clumsy. I think. I think that's maybe the only part that I feel like I'm not as poetic as some of these other individuals. And maybe I don't read enough poetry. I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, poetry doesn't even factor into my definition of artist, but that's interesting. You know, like I like that. That's like a nice little insight on you on the way out. Well, this has been lovely, man. Like, this is like my favorite shit is just talking Latinos.
Uh-huh.
Talking to Latinos about Latino shit, you know, it's like, hey man, isn't it good to be here? But doesn't it also really fucking suck? Wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have to be here? uh, but yeah, man, it's a pleasure, and I got a lot of love for like one of my first friends growing up. His dad worked for the WHO, so we lived in Costa Rica, and he was Guatemalan, and so I've always had like a lot of. He was from Antigua. I've always had a lot of love for that country, even though I've never been. I've seen pictures. All of that stuff is so fucking beautiful. Like El Salvador, you know, like if it wasn't for all the destruction that, like, you know, that certain alphabet agencies. One of my new favorite terms is the blob, the Washington foreign policy blob. Like, if it wasn't for the blob, those places would be fucking amazing. You know, it's crazy. Like, there's just no place we don't fuck with. Like, I'm like, who don't we fuck with? You know, like, yeah, you go down to Chile, we fuck with them. You go down to Argentina, Brazil, like, there's just nobody. Brazil, oddly enough, Brazil is the last Latin American country to ban slavery, which is interesting. That's not on. I'm not putting that on them. I'm just like, you know, throwing out facts. I love Brazil. But yeah, man. Anything that we can promote for you?
Let me see. Well, speaking of Washington D.C., we just opened the it's called Scanning Horizon, the biennial at the Mocha Arlington,
Oh,
which is
cool.
really close to our alphabet agency friends.
Yeah, I know. I grew up. I grew up around there. You know, look, the UN is not that distant from. I mean, it's definitely a neoliberal institution. So, I you know, one time my mom asked my dad, is like, do you think you're really helping? And he goes, I know there's 6 people I'm helping. And that's basically our family, which is the most Latino shit that you've ever heard. It's like, I can't save the world, but you guys are eating, you know. So yeah. But yeah, man, thank you. And then what's your Instagram?
At
It's
Young
young.
Bauhaus.
Yeah, which I definitely appreciate. And now that I know your work a little bit better, I definitely see how how you're into that. But cool, man. Yeah, I guess that's everything. It's been a pleasure. And you guys, thank you for watching. If you like the show, like it, subscribe, comment, and we've got. Oh yeah, rate us 5 stars wherever you listen to. And we'll be back next week with another guest and another topic that may or may not be art related. This one was art related, but also very, very upsetting for people that don't know this history. Reliving pains.